Dr. J.J. Hurtak and Dr. Desiree Hurtak are social scientists, futurists, authors, and founders of the Academy for Future Science, an international organization. Their public presentations on the UFO phenomenon go back to 1977, when Dr. Hurtak was a presenter at the first World Congress on UFOs in Acapulco, Mexico, along with J. Allen Hynek. In 1979, J.J. Hurtak was one of the first to give a briefing to the world press on extraterrestrial biological entities in Mexico City. He was also a presenter at the first government-related UFO disclosure conference when cosmic cultures meet in Washington, D.C. at American University, along with Dr. John Mack.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Drs. Hurtak, JJ, and Desiree. Welcome to Exopolitics Today.
Thank you, Michael. It's always great to be in touch with you. And as you know, we've been traveling throughout the world since we last talked. We were in Egypt doing archaeological studies, and we're back on home soil right now. So we're ready to catch up with you on a variety of themes.
And there's so much going on right now, from disclosure to just people's interest all over the world, starting to release more and more information about non-human origin spacecraft.
Yes, well, the idea of non-human intelligence is definitely in the public eye now with recent whistleblower testimonies. But you're in Egypt, and Egypt has a rich history of non-human intelligence or ancient aliens and associated with pyramids. So what do you know about that?
We know quite a bit. In fact, I'd like to use this as an opportunity to share with you and our audience this book we published a few years back called Gizeh's Industrial Complex, which is our studies using remote sensing technology, that is ground penetrating radar, musical technology, etc., to examine underneath the causeway connected with the three pyramids in Giza. And we were able to come up with the evidence of the Tomb of Osiris in 1997, 2 years before Zawi Hawass, the major archaeological specialist, announced it to the world in 1999.
But I think our big interest in all of this is also the fact that it's much older. And when we went back to Egypt this time, more and more, we'll say, archaeologists are starting to look at that and see that, it's not 3,000 years old. I mean, it's probably not even 6,000 years old. It's probably from the time, if you want to say, minimum Atlantis. And so how did they get this technology? That's the real question about everything. And we do think it came from the star gods. And even if they weren't the ones to put brick upon brick upon brick, they were the ones to give the information. And actually our book, Gizeh's Industrial Complex, just talks about the fact that we believe they use some of these technologies, these temples, these places for hydrogen technology, for hydrogen energy, because it's very, very simple. And it looks like they could have done that and created certain types of gases they would have used for lighting, and also just hydrogen water, which is a very popular thing coming out right now for people's health. So a lot of interesting things that we're discovering today that we think was known 12,000 years ago.
I'm going to show the audience again a picture of me approximately 110 feet underneath the Giza Plateau with a handheld ground penetrating laser unit and pointing with one finger to the lid of what came to be called the Tomb of Osiris. At that time, we were not sure what we were uncovering, and the Egyptian authorities were careful as to allow us permission to excavate. We had permission to bring cameras underneath the ground to use exotic technology, but not to excavate. Fortunately, we were able to go down several inches and find the lid, which of course opened the conversation with Zahi Hawass and the Department of Antiquities, which then took our project to be their project. And so we were kind of left out of the action in 1999 with the Fox television release. But
although he said,
by the way, there was a group 2 years before, referring to our group of geologists, archaeologists, linguists, and music specialists. So that really was a verification for us that we were entering a new period of time where Osiris represents, according to Egyptian tradition, the Lord or teacher who brings music to the planet, knowledge of the stars, and who represents what comes to be known in philosophy, theology, as the ascension process of leaving Earth and going to the home star system.
And the star system was Orion, and we feel that that is a key, we'll say, portal of ascension, not only for just us going there, but what happens after that. I mean, that it connects to other multidimensional realms outside of this, even maybe this whole universe.
So the bottom line is the Giza complex would be the natural place for a time capsule of information concerning the evolution of the human race. It would be the ideal place where cosmic intelligence outside our solar system would want to come back and look at these gargantuan landforms and suggest that we're going up a few inches on the side of the pyramid as a model of evolution as it was understood by the gods. I would prefer to use the term cosmic engineers rather than gods, because this is a term that has been demythologized so much it doesn't seem to have any weight in intellectual academic circles. But nonetheless, Desiree, you're right, and Michael, you're right in making assertions. This is the time of the return of the gods or cosmic architects.
Well, there was this triumvirate, if you like, or the three principal Egyptian gods, Osiris, Horus, and Set, were engaged in this struggle for power. So we're just talking about different factions of extraterrestrials that competed for control over Egypt and control over that part of the world in ancient history.
Well, it's interesting because we're starting to see that this planet is based on this kind of tug of war. And it's sad to see that. I think there were a lot of people who were positive, thinking, oh, we're evolving into this greater reality. And now we have, what, 2 wars around us. So I think what it is a reality that we are living in a consciousness field that is not limited to the earth, but into the universe around us, that has this dichotomy, this duality, this struggle of, good, bad, whatever you want to call it, at least me versus we. That whole thing is there. And that was present with, Cain and Abel. And it's the same scenario that you see in both the Mayan culture, right? In a sense, there was this death situation that happened, and then the twins went to find who killed somebody. And also you find this in Egypt. So you basically had Osiris and you had Set. And when Osiris came back from teaching around the world, his brother Set, and it's interesting, I'm just going to throw this out, the form of Osiris is like a man's form. The form of Set is more like an animal form. They don't know if it's a jackal, a dog, something that's missing. No one really understands the form of Set. So, but anyway, Set killed Osiris. Then Isis comes onto the scene. Of course, she was the wife of Osiris. She puts back all these pieces together because Set had cut him into pieces. And then she kind of gets him to be together with her, even though he's dead, and they form Horus. So I'm just saying, in terms of the linearity, it's this dichotomy that we're living in that is present. And I think we're going to see that in many, many ways and forms. We have not conquered that duality yet.
And the Catholic Encyclopedia uses the story of Osiris as an example of what is called a proto-Christ figure, one who comes before the story of the New Testament, Jesus the Christ of authentic resurrection. Ironically, the early Catholic Church, with the Stations of the Cross, mark 14 Stations of the Cross. We believe there's a mathematical similarity because the body of Osiris is divided into 14 pieces. So subconsciously, the Coptic Church picked up on the symbolism that was placed on and reenacted within the concept of the New Testament.
And if you want to say why 14 in terms of our cosmology, it's the 7 physical chakras, and then there's actually 7 higher chakras. And we're disconnected from our higher selves. We think at one point we were all Adamic species. That means male and female. And basically we came from light energy into physical matter. We came into this realm of duality, but that wasn't our original essence of who we are. So reconnecting the 14 means connecting our physical body with our overself body.
What's the connection between the Anunnaki, the Sumerian gods, and the Egyptian gods? Are we talking about just the same extraterrestrials that colonized or set up colonies in Sumeria, that they also did the same thing in Egypt? Well, what's the connection between Enlil, Enki, Marduk, and Osiris, Horus, and Set?
Well, let me start with this, and then Dr. Hurtak has a lot to say. But basically, we believe we're living in a realm that has many extraterrestrial intelligences, as well as many hierarchical intelligences. And when we all, so to speak, colonized the planet, the gods or the star deities were part and parcel of our management here. So there's a lot of different hierarchies, a lot of different groups that do work together, some of which don't work together and are in opposition to one another.
And this is the whole background to what we call comparative religion. Whether we're studying with Frank Moore Cross from Harvard University or Robert Grant from the University of Chicago, who I studied with years ago in ancient Gnostic texts, the Middle East was really the crossroads of great civilizations from the East to the Near East and North Africa. And so you find a common blend of ideas of higher theologies and cosmic stories from Sumeria that filter down into the Semitic traditions. They're then transposed into Egypt. Egypt then absorbs traditions coming from East Africa, North Africa. So it's hard really to clear the deck and say this is where this type of cosmology begins. But it is clear that the God of the prophets, the God of the Semitic prophets, were good editors and were able to take the Ugaritic texts and the different Akkadian texts, the Proto-Palestinian texts, and say there was a God of all gods, the Most High Elyon, out of which the stories of creation come. And it's up to really the experts now to come out with their assessment that for 6,000 years we've been dealing with local theology. We are suggesting in our work that the Egyptology goes back at least 30 to 40,000 years before present, and that there's a much larger story.
Let's take for a moment even the Greek gods, because most people are more familiar with them than even Anunnaki cosmologies. But in actuality, these powers were able to come here and influence us. In fact, you have the whole scenario with the Tower of Babel, because
as we see here, the larger beings, the larger Adamic beings addressing the human race.
But in actuality, that if the whole scenario of the Tower of Babel had not taken place, we were being given information that could destroy Mother Earth, that could even destroy ourselves. So it was necessary to divide. We think divide the languages. We think actually the last 6,000 years, we have been watched and quarantined. Now everyone knows what quarantine means, but we have basically been quarantined from some of these other forces that would interfere not only with our genetic makeup, and you know how we feel about the genetic makeup. We feel we're Adamic species, one clear species that exists in the universe that could be taken advantage of because we have a higher consciousness connection. We have a soul consciousness connection, which some of these other extraterrestrial species don't have. But in actuality, we've been protected for our own ability to grow. Now we feel that quarantine is being lifted right now. So we're going to be bombarded literally by all these different levels of intelligence that had frequented the planet thousands of years ago and that are going to frequent.
And this includes non-human-like intelligence, strange faces on human bodies, which ironically appears in some of the reliefs in Egypt. We were just there doing extensive work. My work in Egypt began in the 60s when I was studying Coptic literature, and then I progressed to other areas of Near Eastern studies. So we see on the screen now the different anatomical forms of the gods. But as you said, amongst all of them, there are some that stand out. And of course, we know the important would be the Osiris figure, suggesting to the human race We have a destiny in space in the region of Orion. The figure of Horus represents the cosmic eye, but it also references a mathematical grid of how the eyelid, the inner parts of the eye, the iris, and the brow all represent mathematical terms of a grid of 64 calculations. And so all of these symbols have mathematical and what we call musical realities that, when enacted, bring about other relationships.
But I just want to say, when we're talking about different face forms, I mean, you can see that Horus actually is, it's a hawk, of course, it's like a bird form. And you also have Thoth, which is also a bird form. Then you have Sekhmet, which is a lion form, the lion-faced gods, which were talked about in Coptic philosophies and many others. So you have the lion gods, and also cat-faced gods like Bastet. So you have these, and if you go to the Agdoad, which is in the Dendera temple, you find actually 8 figures. There are 4 male and 4 female gods, and the females are mainly serpent-type beings. So you have these reptilian forms of gods, and we don't think that these are just symbolic, you know, pretty pictures. These were beings that were frequently visiting planet Earth. And
we say this, we make this assertion because we were just there with students from Europe and from Africa, people of different cultural backgrounds, but singing the Egyptian names and doing the mantras with deep and profound dedication allowed several of the students to actually see momentarily the wall literally open paraphysically, and they could see a different set of hieroglyphic figures that they were able to write down with precision. So we know there's a vibratory physics that's connected with the chambers of the pyramids, why they were constructed. And when you use certain musical cues, if you have musical ability, singing the Egyptian names, the mantras in a particular way, paraphysically events can and will happen. We've documented this.
Yeah, and I actually had an experience while we were meditating in the King's Chamber, this is some years back, that the walls dropped away and I was out in outer space. And that same thing happened to a friend of mine a few years later. And then strange enough, we were recording for Deep Space, a Gaia TV show, and someone else had said on the program that we were also on that he had that exact experience while he was meditating in the King's Chamber. The walls dropped away and he was out there in space. So these things, you know, there's some sort of energy construction there, mostly probably based on sacred geometry, that allows these things to happen.
I'd like to show one picture to the audience here. It's maybe difficult to see without a close-up, but it shows the interior of the Grand Gallery and the Great Pyramid lit up in golden light. This is a response to the chanting and the vocalization that I did. Years ago, I had a very good voice as a tenor, and singing the ancient Egyptian and Hebrew mantras together, suddenly a paraphysical columnar light manifested in the center and began to move up and down the region of the staircase that you see on the sides. And so the guards that were there were shaken visibly, that the sound structure keyed in the overtones to react in such a way as to literally create a spark of light that lit up the whole interior. So we know there's a whole process of why the pyramid is called fire in the middle. It means there's a middle column of light associated with the powers of the mind, the powers of the voice, the powers of the heart. And when this is assembled and used and orchestrated properly, things will happen of mind over matter. And this is why we feel these pyramids represent a type of Bible in stone, a representation of a much earlier cycle of history that perhaps is connected with the return of the extraterrestrial architects.
Well, one of the chief extraterrestrials in the Egyptian pantheon was the sun god Ra. So are we talking about an actual extraterrestrial, or are we talking about some personification of this living entity, the sun? Because many academics will say, well, with Ra, the sun god, that's just a mythological personification of the sun, that there was no entity associated with it. But of course, in Egyptian mythology, Ra is a chief god. So what can you clarify that?
Yes, in Egyptian cosmology, there's the traditional nuances given to the primary factors of the gods all who have temples along the Nile. However, in the deeper mystery schools, and this I emphasize is very important, those that work behind the scenes in the initiation text, in what is called the breathing text, there is a realization that these are much higher than we would call the normal Egyptian figures or heads of chiefdoms, kingdoms. These are what we will call the ultra-terrestrials, beings of godlike quality who do not die, that exist in a region beyond evolution, who frequent our solar system and have rooms of initiation like the chamber of the sun, one yet to be found in the Great Pyramid. But the Japanese and the French that we talked to have done a great job in locating 3 other new chambers, and we suspect there are 3 others, one of which could be this chamber of the sun or Ra, suggesting that we're looking at not normal events or normal concepts of light, but superluminal light, light from a much higher realm that interpenetrates the realm of the human planet, awakens the human planet, and ultimately prepares the human race for the arrival of the entourage of Ra, or what we will call the celestials.
Right. And so in a certain sense, we're saying there was a thought forms from hierarchical intelligences connected with such things as this god Ra that went on to create this reality, this universe. We call it an experimental realm that we're living in. And so it's not necessarily extraterrestrials, because we drop extraterrestrials one level down to those who were created in this local realm of life space that we're living in. But behind that is the consciousness of hierarchies, one could call the sons of God, that in terms of a biblical term, that created this realm. And they created this realm for purposes, we believe, actually, of soul evolution. But think about it. If we have good and bad, plus and minus, every moment is our moment of choice. So how do we make the right choices every moment? This is something that we are constantly bombarded with. So the concept behind Ra is really bringing the energy of life to this reality, getting this reality going, getting it started. We believe there's myriads of universes. This is just one of them. And that's why you end up with Nut, who is really the body of the lady of all the stars coming together. You find something similar in the Mayans, where they have Exocal-Nuk. This is Lady Cloth Weaver, where the Mayans believed every star is positioned according to a higher or a code structure of life. There's nothing random, nothing at all. In fact, scientists are starting to say even chaos theory seems to be non-completely random.
So much of what we're sharing is we shared with Dr. Otto Schaden, who was the great Egyptologist who made discoveries in the Valley of the Kings. And what is important here, Michael, is the fact that we're working now with the paraphysical use of sound. We're working with documented events of sound structures inside the Great Pyramid chambers that connect with the circulatory processes of our heart, our mind, our circulatory system. And as I brought with me for our discussion, we're working also with the concept of the giants. Our work was also in Egyptology and African studies, where I taught years ago, East African studies. And I'm showing a picture now of one of the large footprints found in the south area of
South Africa, yeah.
Where a large being, upwards of 28 feet, as calculated by the size of the footprint, did exist when the Earth had a different atmosphere. People grew higher, or perhaps this is a visitor from some other realm. Anyway, this was shared privately with several noted geologists and anthropologists who agreed with us that there are large footprints in various parts of Africa and Southeast Asia that they cannot account for.
And probably South America as well.
This follows a map of information that I published in a book called The Keys of Enoch in 1973. And in this book, there is a map in Key 215 that actually shows areas of the world, I'm pointing here, where there were updates of human civilization.
So one of the places that it points to, and this is way back in 73 that Dr. Jack came out with this, it points right through the Isle of Flores, which is where they found the little hobbits. And yes, it's also in the introduction book as well.
In 2003.
Yeah, so in 2003, they found these hobbit intelligences that used to live on the Isle of Flores. So there's a line going straight down from there. Also, this large footprint is very close to the line going straight down from the Great Pyramid. So
this is the only book that has the actual grid pattern of what we will call cosmic intelligence is teaching us, where side by side the giants, we have the hobbits, we have the small people. And we are being prepared right now to accept a wide variety of life forms that are coming into the arena of the human experience. And this will be seen in a documentary perhaps you're aware of called Extraterrestrial Species Almanac.
So there's a book by Craig Campobasso about this, but now with early 2024, they expect to have this in a film. And what's exciting about the film is it actually shows some of these life forms, extraterrestrial forms, in kind of real images.
And this is based upon the MUFON research, which is very sterling, of top scientists and geologists working behind the scenes, such as ourselves. So what we're saying to the public audience is we have to fasten our seatbelts. It's not a question of recognizing non-human intelligence, but recognizing a whole spectrum of intelligence that our ancestors in Greece and Rome, the Middle East, recognized. This is no big thing. When you think of Homer, when you think of Herodotus, when you think of Virgil, when you think of Tacitus, some of the greatest minds accepted the fact that we were surrounded by an arena of godlike entities, life forms. Of course, what is important here is the story of the prophets and the apostles, suggesting above all of this is a much higher realm of the ultra-terrestrial that allow these other realms to exist. But ultimately, they will be evaluated, and we, in turn, will also be reconnected with this great reevaluation of how we've used our time and space correctly or incorrectly.
So the gods, the Sumerian gods, the Egyptian gods, so you would agree then that they walked among humanity, that they were seen, they were much larger, they were in some cases giants. So, you know, this raises the question, people associate giants with a genetic creation by the gods, by the Anunnaki. And the giants, I guess if we're talking about the Gigi, that they were created for mining originally and then eventually had other purposes. But were the giants, one of the key functions, were these giants created as kind of like avatar bodies for ET consciousness to come in, and so that the ETs would be like on a stasis chamber on their spacecraft in space, because in their natural body, the Earth's atmosphere would be inhospitable for some of the gods. You know, we're talking about Osiris, we're talking about Horus, or if we're talking about Enki or Enlil. So they created these giant avatar bodies so that the gods would kind of like come in and use that avatar for a period of time, but they would, you know, that would account for, say, that 28-foot tall giant that you showed the footprint of.
Well, it is clear that our atmosphere was much different millions of years ago, and even 250,000 years ago. So again, the depictions by some of the Greek artists, and for that matter, the artists from India and China also reflect in their gigantic gargantuan statues of the Buddha figures, or what we see in Egypt, these massive human-like figures, all suggesting we are just newcomers to the scene of evolution, and that our ability, frankly, is to grow up and to evaluate where we are in relationship to the other thought leaders, the other movers of change within the greater cosmos.
Right. I think there's a multiplicity of reality here. I definitely feel that in many cases, they needed the bodies to come into, to bring their consciousness into. If you go back to the Bible, Genesis chapter 6, it says the B'nai Elohim, which are the sons of God. That means they're not the highest levels of reality, but the next level. We call this a S-O-N, Sun universe, because this is really, it's a universe of free will, of these beings who decide to, let's try to do something, you know.
Of main sequence star systems, as astronomers refer to it, as you see here in this depiction right here, of the larger star god, and the three figures who could easily be wise men or teachers. But then you, in the midst of this, you have the figure of the star system, specifically indicating that we are one of many worlds.
Right. And so if you go back again to Genesis 6, so supposedly the sons of God had relations with the daughters of man, or like us, and they created between the two these giants. But the giants in the long run, as we're told, actually caused havoc on the earth because it's kind of like too many elephants in a small area. They started destroying the earth. And there seems to be those, and this, maybe some of your audience doesn't want to listen to this, but there seems to be those who are supervising even beyond those beings who, according to the ancient Book of Enoch, actually said, hey, we've got to get down there and clean this up temporarily. And they then created the flood that took us back to our original genetic code.
That's chapter 7 of the ancient Book of Enoch in the Ethiopic. So what we're saying to you is there's a Bible within a Bible of mathematical symbols and musical vibratory codes. When used correctly, elevate our consciousness to actually be in mental and spiritual communication. And now it is our time to become more of a participatory audience of humanity. From the standpoint of orthodoxy, we have to evaluate and discern who we will be connected with in the, shall we say, the post-disclosure moment. At the same time, from the standpoint of traditional history and anthropology, this has always been a reality. Our ancestors' going all the way back 20,000, 30,000 years ago, even to the recent findings in eastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, suggest that we were one humanity amongst the gods, the giants of the universe. Even the fallen Nephilim, the fallen angels or instructors, were even thought of as the large erudite watchers who took the wrong course.
And, I love your concept of the avatar body, because I do think that that's true. In a certain sense, these beings are so superior, even though we're not that inferior either. I want to qualify that, but they're so superior that they can just manifest into physical bodies, but not be entirely, and I think that's the key, not be entirely locked into that physical body. They can just make it one of their many manifestations. And
we've illustrated this in a book called The Overself Awakening. In that book, we show the avatar that is psychically a potential projection of our future, where we began to grasp those realities that were researched at Stanford Research Institute back in the 70s and 80s. In our book called Mind Dynamics in Space and Time, we go into a lot of research connecting mind over matter, the abilities of remote viewing, remote sensing, remote healing. All of these were considered to be the powers of the higher spiritual endowments that we would eventually have, that would be returned to us when we were ready to join the family of nations.
Well, I know one of the things that comes up again and again, especially in a lot of evangelical Christian research on the giants, is that the giants are the progeny of the fallen angels. They're evil. The Old Testament describes these kind of pogroms against giants. So if giants start appearing in the modern age, that they're evil and we should just obliterate them. So, I find that to be a very simplistic view of the giants in ancient history. I think giants probably like us. You have the positive, the very loving, positive, benevolent ones. And then you also have the cannibalistic ones that did, prey on people. So, do you want to elaborate and maybe clarify, with giants, is there a kind of moral, ethical spectrum of motivations that we need to really factor in as, in terms of understanding them historically and in terms of understanding their sudden reappearance in modern society?
Well, there's no doubt that in the Bible, it does say that they, had relations, the sons of God had relations with the daughters of man and then created these giants. But I also want to say right now, when you look at extraterrestrial data, that there's the tall whites. Now, the tall whites, they may not be, 23 feet tall, but they're at least, 8 feet tall or 9 feet tall, I would still call that, from my perspective, a giant. So there's different species out there that aren't just limited to this planet. And I think we have to start thinking in these wider terms as well. So yeah, not all giants are bad. I mean, you always have the jolly green giant. I always love that one.
Or think of the giants of the mind like Einstein. Think of the people movers who are considered to be the great minds of the universe. In our book, Over Self-Awakening, we have had European illustrators show graphically and pictographically how the Coptic traditions and those of the Near East, which would be in sync with the biblical traditions, we would call the Kabbalistic or mystical, show how we graduate from different levels of language to understand the mothering aspect of the universe, and through this also the compassionate Christ.
Right. We see ourselves actually as this little being in the bottom, and we're actually much bigger than that when you talk about consciousness. And I think that's the same for the giants, that, you know, they can manifest. And this is the Sanskrits talked about this too. You know, you could project into different realities. You can stay where you are and be there, but you can also project your consciousness into other manifestations. I mean, people talk about walk-ins or something like that, but does that mean that that original source of that person is gone from where they were? We would say no, that consciousness is present, and then they simply, for a short time, depending on how short or how long, spend time in a physical form. And that's really, I think, how it works, that we ourselves are not even limited to this form.
Right. And we have to put this in the larger context of why the governments have been reluctant to put all the cards on the table regarding the extraterrestrial presence. Indeed, there are some poacher groups that have taken advantage of human realities. There are some situations in history that are quite troubling, which suggest that certain leaders were influenced by those who did psychic channeling connected with sources of mischief and destruction.
And that's why we've been quarantined for all this time.
We have to understand that in our traditions of knowing the scriptures and working with the legitimate scholars of these great and awesome traditions, that there was a way of filtering knowledge and using divine language as a protective screen to judge, as it were, the fallen emissaries or fallen angels. This is the work of the book of Psalms. Clearly, King David tells us in Psalm 82 that we are to understand the God systems, but understand the principle of the most supreme one in the midst of the gods. So we come up with this, shall we say, very complex cosmology of many gods, many realities, and you can understand why the government authorities for many years have been reluctant to talk about this, because it has psychological and theological ramifications.
I mean, it would be easy if it was just one spaceship, you know, that occasionally, you know, maybe dropped in and said hello to a few government leaders or a few people from here and there. But technically, there's myriads of agendas of extraterrestrial. The book, Extraterrestrial Species Almanac, which Dr. Hurtak's mentioned in terms of the star Arcturus, although we also talk about the Pleiades and Orion quite often, basically, you know, it has 80 different species. And so, you know, there's myriad, and each one has their own agendas, and many of them are local. They have the same consciousness field that we have. They have, you know, the good guys and the bad guys, maybe only 20% or 10% bad. That's, you know, up to your.
So we're telling our audience to look at the research of Lynn Buchanan, who's with the intelligence community, or look at the research of our late colleague from New York, who was involved with the genetic experiments.
Bud Hawkins, yeah.
All of these are very gifted researchers. And we have worked behind the scenes with chieftains of various tribes. In fact, I'm holding up for the audience to see a teaching belt from the Shavanti peoples of Brazil. We are honorary chiefs because we work with them, and they tell us that there is a variety of competitive life forms in the universe. And this is the time for the Star Nation people to return because of the mischief makers.
Yes. Well, one of the people that I got to work with closely from 2016 and 2017 was William Tompkins. And he really put out incredible information about his direct participation in this program involving aerospace corporations that he was working at being helped by these human-looking extraterrestrials in designing space carriers for the US Navy. And I was given the diaries of William Tompkins, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that in the late 1970s, I think it was 78, 79, and 80, that he met with both of you for, I think, with Dr. Hurtak, JJ, for about 10 times. So, you know, what did you get to talk with Bill Tompkins about, and did it have something to do with his firsthand experiences with these human-looking extraterrestrials working inside of these aerospace companies?
Well, first of all, thank you for putting his picture on the screen. He was a great patriot, a man we highly recognize as a true researcher. He was interested in the evidence that I brought out in the Keys of Enoch. Again, all of you who are not acquainted with this should know that in 1973, I was the first to release the pictures of the pyramids on Mars. And this is due to my remote viewing research with other colleagues like Harold Sherman. These massive pyramidal structures are 10 to 100 times larger than the pyramids in Egypt. And Bill Tompkins was interested in my knowledge of all planetary civilization, and was there a connection between Egypt and the pyramids on Mars? And I said, yes. The Arabic name for Giza, Cairo, is called El Kahiro, which means the spacious one, or Mars in Arabic cosmology. In fact, most of the star systems we use, including the 3 stars and the Belt of Orion, have Arabic names. And so we are indebted to the wise and erudite Arab historians and astronomers. To cut to the chase, Bill was interested in the quality of intelligence that he knew I was in touch with, that looked highly at the Abrahamic tradition and the survival of the Western world as we know it.
Right. So I also want to say that it's important to realize that the Navy really was one of the first, we'll say, branches of our military that was totally aware of extraterrestrial intelligence. So this does fall in line with things that we had heard from Bill Tompkins as well, that the Navy was working with these forms, because I grew up in Florida, and right in the area of Miami, that's a point of the Bermuda Triangle. And I saw things as a young age. That's how I got more and more involved with my husband, but that there's definitely clearly bases there. I had a friend that went out into the water she was a marine biologist, and they had encounters, and she told me about that as well. And then there, of course, in California, off the coast of California as well, and other places. So the Navy has been aware of this for a long, long time. We had another friend who was an admiral. I won't mention his last name, but he was totally aware of all of that. So that was part of what Bill was talking about in terms of the advancement of the Navy. I just want to bring up as well, even though we're talking about the Egypt so much, but actually there was someone in the Israeli space program called Haim Eshed. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. I'm sure you are, though. And he said also that, and he's retired now, but he was very, very high up. I think it was even a general. And he said that clearly we are in touch with extraterrestrial intelligence. I'm talking about governments, the U.S. government, the Israeli government, probably other governments as well, the the Russians and others, and that we are actually having joint programs with them, and even going to Mars with them. So it's not something that I'm saying, but I think it confirms a lot of the talk that Bill Tompkins had talked about how we had been in cahoots, with these government leaders as well. So
yes, not only did we have the opportunity as consultants to understand these unbelievable landforms that could suggest previous civilization, but later, within the context of several computer forums, we published a book called The Face on Mars: Evidence of a Lost Martian Civilization, the catchy title that my co-writer came up with. And in this book, we have pictures from Vince DiPietro and his colleagues at the Goddard facility showing that there is enough evidence to suggest non-natural landforms were created by those forms of intelligence from another solar system or galaxy that stopped off long enough in their Lamborghini to take evidence of life, or this we will call the remains of life that did exist on Mars, but were destroyed because of the change of the atmosphere.
So here's another shot from Mars, actually, that shows what they call the Inca City.
So flying above South America, looking down, the ruins would suggest Inca civilization, or what we call civilization akin to the earlier indigenous scholars and scientists that were there in South America.
But of course, that picture was from Mars. And I have to say, we worked extensively with a woman named Elizabeth Clark, that she's from South Africa. And she had contact when she was a younger person with someone from Alpha Centauri and Proxima Centauri, which
I will get back to Elizabeth. I want to talk about Elizabeth clearer.
I just want to say, can I just say really quickly that she mentioned that her civilization that she was in touch with had originally been on Venus, Earth, and Mars.
Well, I just wanted to kind of back up a little bit, go to Professor General Haim Eshed, because he said that the Galactic Federation was in touch with the Trump administration and told President Trump, who apparently was wanting to disclose extraterrestrials living amongst us, that that humanity wasn't ready yet, that our technology was not yet sufficiently advanced enough for us to be able to handle the news of extraterrestrial life. So do you want to elaborate on what Professor Eshed had to say about the Galactic Federation and us being ready for an announcement?
If you go back to Bill Tompkins, I mean, I think almost every president has had some inkling about contact with aliens. Supposedly Kennedy, of course, did, and others as well. Maybe Carter and maybe Clinton didn't have the full story for a while. Trump seems to have had more. Who knows? I mean, that's really hard to say. But in terms of, we do feel that there is this program, and that's what David Grush was saying at the June.
And I wrote it in my book in 1973. Those actual words that you quote are in the book in 3 different locations.
The Galactic Federation.
So
yes.
we are being psychologically, sociologically, and theologically prepared to understand what the prophets in the Old Testament and the apostles in the New Testament. If you read it very carefully, Paul speaks to the scholars on Mars Hill. He says, I paraphrase, represents something much greater than the gods of the Greek poets. An oblique reference to the fact that there was this relationship to the civilization on Mars and the visitations from these other life forms. But the God, the true God, the Most High Supreme God of the Abrahamic tradition is this God that we should pay attention to, because we are going to understand in the reconstruction of human planetary history that we've been here as a human species much longer. There have been cycles where great civilizations have disappeared due to the misuse of technology or climate change, and we're in the outskirts of something tremendous that requires a spiritual psychology of hope and understanding of why we have prophets and why we have those who go to higher levels of cosmology.
And we also feel actually we did not evolve from the ooze of the earth. We feel that we as an Adamic species exist on other planets. This is what Elizabeth Clark also had seen, and many others have tuned into. And the Keys of Enoch, actually, when Dr. Hurtak had his experience, which was a type of Merkaba experience, not an extraterrestrial, but a Merkaba experience. We can qualify that later.
Spiritual experience of higher manifestation of light.
Right. So he saw things past, present, and future on this planet, and he saw things in higher realms and other dimensions. But bottom line, he was told that 64 areas of science were going to literally get more advanced so that we were prepared for contact. And so I think that's exactly what the extraterrestrials are saying as well. But funny enough, when you really look at the work of Haim Eshed, one of the things he said is the extraterrestrials themselves are trying to figure out more about the universe. And I would go back to our colleague Linda Moulton Howe, who says some of the extraterrestrials really are admiring us, even though we're not flying in spacecraft, but we have this deeper awareness, this deeper soul connection to a higher consciousness plane that they are not able to do. So there's a lot of intricacies going on as to who we are in the universe and why we're now getting updated, so to speak, in all these areas of science so we can be prepared for contact.
And Michael, this is your work, to open up the doors for much larger discussion. This is not a simple situation of big statues versus small humans, higher knowledge versus limited historic knowledge. No, this is a preparation for a dialogue, a conversation that I believe will take humankind into space kind, humans into what I will call a global citizenship. That we have to have the theology, the cosmology, the psychology that is of the light, is of the divine, and that is the missing part of the scientific paradigms that we've seen, with few exceptions. Until recent times, we've used only one side of the brain, which is the left analytical rather than the right multidimensional. This is the importance of what I will call the feminine side of the Holy Spirit, or the Shekinah, to use the prophetic language of how we must open the doors to perception on a much later level with the compassion of the heart.
And also, it's some of this information, like findings and discoveries, whether it's AI or whether it's archaeological finds going back like 150,000 years in San Diego, seeing the mammoth bones placed uniquely together.
In a fair position.
But all of these situations are, leading us to a greater awareness of who we are. And we feel that information is coming from other levels of intelligence. We spend time in Silicon Valley, and we know many scientists that actually kind of in their dreams get this information and they go and make it. So it's not that unique to have people really download information that can be used to help humanity, or can be used to advance humanity, or even destroy humanity, depending on how they use it.
So do we focus on giants of the earth, or we focus on giants of the mind? And the giants of the mind are both spiritual as well as scientifically aligned with the higher divine source.
Well, this is where your 1973 book, the Keys of Enoch, comes in. I mean, you identify 64 keys, and I mean that seems to be related to this exercise of getting ready for this kind of open galactic contact that Professor Eshed said that the Galactic Federation said we're not quite ready yet. So as a species, in terms of those 64 keys, when will we be ready? Do you think it's very close? Do you think it's a few years ahead? What do you think?
If you can go back one exhibit, just go back one exhibit on the screen of the cover of my book.
Yeah, the cover of the introduction to the Keys of Enoch.
Back on the screen, you will see there, if you look very carefully, an ancient biblical scroll, but then there is the pyramid, and then there is a color capstone in color, bluish violet color. Then the flames come about as this capstone goes around the earth, or is over the earth. I had a special artist from Europe illustrate this according to what I saw in my experience. And we know in
2018, actually,
right,
over the Pentagon
in Washington, D.C., a bluish, large megaform in the shape of a pyramid appeared momentarily. It was filmed by 3 different cameras, illustrated by Jaime Maussan and others. And we saw this over Russia in 2009.
No, yeah, 2009.
So over the Kremlin and over the Pentagon, this form has appeared. This is very important, because this is the first picture in my book, The Keys of Enoch. When the capstone appears over the earth, over certain areas of the earth, beware, we are being watched and prepared to graduate.
Yeah, so actually, some of you maybe had seen that spinning kind of triangle over the Pentagon from 2018. It was done at about 4 in the morning. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then Jaime Maussan actually did extra research to see who filmed it, who else saw it, and he found, yes, 4 people in total. Actually, the main film that you see is 2 people in a car, and they're throwing the camera practically back and forth to try to shoot this. It's a fabulous shot, and it really does match the something 9 years earlier over the Kremlin. So we do feel more and more forms of extraterrestrial intelligence are warning us. As you know from Robert Saleh, they've neutralized nuclear missiles in our silos. And this is a clear sign that they do not want us to use any nuclear technology.
So is this the return of the angels, in biblical language, the B'nai Elohim? Is this the coming of the seraphim? Is this the coming of the angelic ones that the Apostle Paul refers to? Or is this something that is a completely different category? Again, we're not saying that we are the experts. We're just saying that we are scientists. We have documented behind the scenes. We work with some of the astronauts. We work with some of the more gifted Oriental scholars and Near Eastern scholars who tell us that it's clear that the scenarios of the past repeat themselves.
But Dr. Hurtak was told that actually the timing, first of all, is not known in this consciousness field, because if it was, then more and more people would be prepared on different levels, even like negative preparation. But we're also being watched and cared for. Actually, if you've seen in Netflix, there's a new series called Encounters, which is sponsored by Steven Spielberg, and they do the evidence over Fukushima, where there is this kind of long disc that was seen. And really, the ETs have been helping us. I even think the whitewater off of San Diego and the Tic Tac was probably trying to neutralize some of the buildup of energy that then relates over to the San Andreas fault line. So they're trying to help us. They're trying to keep us together as long as possible and to keep this going. Dr. Hurtak, though, however, in that book, but actually in the larger book, talks about our sun is a variable star. He used that quote, and this is in 1973. And then about 2003, NASA came out with the exact same quote from one of the scientists. Our sun is a variable star. What does that mean? Well, we're going into the solar maximum cycle, which happens every 11 years, supposedly on average.
Our satellites could be knocked out.
Yeah.
We could be thrown into darkness.
Yeah, but anyway, so the next solar max was supposed to be 2025. Now, because it's a variable star, they're looking to see maybe it's going to max in 2024. So that's a possibility. And the whole variability also means how strong the sun cycle goes and how strong are these solar flares. And in some cases, in 2012, there was that big thing in 2012, end of the world. Well, we missed a Carrington event by 9 days. So I think certain things are going on by extraterrestrial intelligence, by the Galactic Federation, if one wants to say, and even we would say higher levels of intelligence to protect and watch. So at some point we will be ready, and it probably will be in, we'll say, my lifetime.
So I must say, we all must fasten our seatbelts. But we all must have the hope and the vision of a better tomorrow. What is said, the house of many mansions is opening its doors, and we're being given an opportunity to go up the ladder of Jacob and see the angels ascending and descending, or we would call them cosmic others, cosmic engineers, some of which bring us gifts, but also this requires a sense of psychological and sociological maturity that we can use these gifts, we can use these insights to help the human race to come together and also understand the portal of ascension in scientific terms, but also in psychological terms, meaning that the whole human race goes into a much different relationship with the galactic councils of wisdom.
And we can even say fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, even 12th dimensional realities.
So you can understand now with all of this information why some of the so-called government experts are a bit careful in wanting to say too much, because there is much. And at the same time, the human heart cries out for truth, for wisdom, for compassion. So as we enlarge this picture on the drawing board of life, we begin to see and understand the importance of those great mystical thinkers of the Coptic Christians, the mystics of the Near East, come down to the present day that include the knowledge of the house of many mansions.
Well, we know that there have been a number of people that have spoken about extraterrestrials living amongst us, whether they were the great minds, whether they great teachers, or as in the case of William Tompkins, just helping designers come up with architectural models for future space carriers. So one of the high-level officials that has talked about this is the former Russian president and former Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, who said, I think it was around 2010, he said that extraterrestrials were living amongst us, and that that there was a organization, kind of like in the Men in Black movies, that was set up to monitor extraterrestrials living amongst us to make sure that they didn't reveal themselves. So does this mean at some point they're just going to announce that there are all these extraterrestrials living amongst us? So how accurate is this information?
Well, we do feel there are some. We had a good friend named Hans Peterson. He was with the Danish, was it?
Air Force.
Air Force. And he said the same. He knew actually George Adamski, who I never took very seriously until I heard what Hans had to say about him, that he said this exact same thing. And this is way back, you know, what, in the 60s, even maybe back to the 50s in some cases, that there were extraterrestrials that were living amongst us. And they just worked normally, and they seemed to just blend in. I know we worked with a friend of ours, Phyllis Schlemmer, and one time actually a being revealed himself to her. He
left up his pants leg, and his leg was completely blue.
So it was like a blue race person. The
face was normal, but the body was blue. So again, we go back to the personifications one finds in ancient Far Eastern as well as Near Eastern depictions about the blue race people that can change their facial form or color who walk amongst us. So going back to the gentleman that you have on the screen, we can't answer specifically to what he's making assertions for, but having translated the papers of Russian cosmologists and having taught in Russia years ago, I can assure you that there's a consensus behind the scenes that was always kept between Russians, Americans, and for that matter, Japanese and others on the highest levels.
And I just want to say one other incident that a very good friend of ours, and we trust her wholeheartedly, she was working in Texas, I'll just go that far, and she went into the ladies' room. There was a new woman who had come into their company, and she just happened to see, she looked in the mirror, because you walk into the ladies' room, most women look at the mirror, and this woman had a reptilian face. And all of a sudden then it changed, and she like freaked out. She ran out. The other lady ran out, never came back to work. She quit her job.
How would you describe
the other
this?
Woman, the reptilian.
How would you describe this stuff to the audience?
Well, I'm just saying.
Reptilian face, what does that mean?
Well, it means they look like a reptile. So the bottom line is I think many of them are living amongst us. And there's some that can't because their whole consciousness field is so different from us. But basically, we're also alien intelligence. As I mentioned, we're a Adamic species. You're going to find us. I think that's the oddest thing from when you talk about contact and reports of extraterrestrials, that you find intelligences that look like us. That's because we just simply got here, we'll say 36,000, maybe even 200,000 years ago, lived through various cycles and changes, kept coming back. We like this planet. I think, who said good planets are hard to find? That was a book named after that, and decided to stay here, even though the consciousness field is very chaotic and dualistic.
Well, I would simply emphasize what Desiree just said by saying we are created in the divine image. We're not happenstance creation. That was conveyed to me in my mystical experience, that we were created into the image.
But there's other images as well, like the bird people.
And that took on a different persona, even though in our scriptures in the book of Ezekiel chapter 1, we have a reference of the Merkabah, the vehicle of light, and you have the four figures. The human face that looks angelic, we have the face of a lion, we have the face of the sacred cow, but also we have the face of an eagle. So there's the bird-faced man mentioned even in the scriptures. So those who think they know the scriptures should read them in the original Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, and they will understand that there is a plurality of life forms that are mentioned. But in the graduation story, we begin to realize that we have a uniqueness of recognizing our limitations. And through grace and through meditation and prayer, we turn to the divine source to be uplifted and not fall victim to those not in the divine image or reflective of the divine love that holds the cosmic law in its great and glorious place of universal teaching.
So what Dr. Hurtak saw is there is this consciousness that is supreme, the universal mind, one could say, and then there's all these various experimental realities, we being in one of them. And in those experimental realities, you find our manifestation as well, even though we have connections to the higher universal mind, and you find other realms of intelligence.
So the Birdman is an archetype that we have found throughout the world, from our work on Easter Island to our work with the Shavantes in South America, to our work with the Egyptian writers and teachers that we see here on the screen. And even our late colleague, Andrei Puharich, who was very high with the military intelligence, said he had a momentary experience of seeing a bird-like figure appear. So this is something that should not be dismissed as pure mythological projection. There is a historical reality of whole civilizations being built by great minds that recognize we're just one of many species forms, and the universe has a great biological diversity. But in this, we have certain steering mechanisms, and we have certain prerogatives of being able to go upwards with the ladder of life or the musical spectrum of knowledge and sound, rather than downward into chaos, confusion, and death. So this is the turning point. I believe, Michael, we're at a turning point with the disclosure conferences in Washington. David Grush and others like him,
Graves and Favor,
have come forth, and I believe we will be there on the front lines putting our information out from other areas of other governments, other social realities of saying, humanity, wake up, this is your time to avoid death and destruction. Do not follow those forces, however subtle and cunning behind the scenes, that want us to go into convulsions of death. They go with those who are wisdom teachers of light, divine purpose, who we will call the Christ message of loving your fellow men.
And just to recap just a little bit, just because the cosmology I think we've been talking about is fairly extensive. So for old generations, we'll say the civilization of Mu and civilization of Atlantis, we've had contact with those who were like the Greek gods or those of the Anunnaki. But in the last 6,000 year cycle, from the flood onwards, we've been somewhat protected, and we've been kind of given our own space, although we'll say like the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the Christ figures and the prophets and those of, we'll say Quetzalcoatl have come in different places to try to upgrade the consciousness of humanity. But at a certain point, and that point we feel is very soon, there will be the day of graduation when we get contact once again with those who are around us in the local life space, the extraterrestrial species, the ultra-terrestrial species, and even the extracelestial species.
Even the former president of Mexico, Jose Lopez Portilla, who I knew personally back in the 70s, gave me his book on Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpents. And he said that the higher intelligence is coming back and the mythology is for real, but it should be understood on a much higher level. And he was the one who allowed the first major congresses on parapsychology to take place, and the first Congress on ufology, which we had in Acapulco, Mexico.
And his wife worked very closely actually with Uri Geller.
So we know on higher levels in Latin America, there is a type of understanding, profound understanding, that you do not see in the rationalizations of some of the teachers who pontificate only in terms of three-dimensional theology, that there's multi-dimensional theology in the realm of the Holy Spirit, or we will call the divine dwelling, that allows us to see God's plan of creation, allowing very unique forms of diversity that ultimately are reconstituted, repurified, and reorganized.
And just to say one more thing about that picture of the Birdman that you were showing, actually what's interesting is not necessarily the Birdman, but oftentimes they're carrying the little, I think Graham Hancock calls it the man bag, or the boy's mail bag. And basically you'll find that actually in places like in Ecuador, and you find it also in pre-Aztec culture, that same bag. So what's in the bag? That's the big question. Is it the wisdom and the knowledge that's coming forth now that's bringing us closer to AI and closer to extraterrestrial
Or
experience?
is it bringing us closer to the I am rather than the IA?
I am.
So,
well, in terms of where we are at now, I mean, in the United States, there is definitely a big push for more transparency on non-human intelligence, UFOs. The rest of the world is kind of pretty slow, apart from places like maybe Mexico and Peru on these issues. So do you feel that what we are witnessing in the United States in terms of the intelligence community, Congress, wanting to kind of bring out this information, that they know that we are at this kind of like transition from a kind of insular society, not knowing our history, not knowing about galactic civilizations, to one where all of a sudden we're going to learn about the history, we're going to learn about the genetic engineering, the role of the gods, and these are kind of like very advanced extraterrestrial organizations like the Galactic Federation and others that are here now, wanting to introduce themselves and help shepherd us or mentor us into a galactic age?
Well, that's a very profound question. What needed to be added to your question is the role of corporate entities or corporate elites. That's where I believe the real information sources need to be brought forth in conjunction with new congressional hearings, as well as the conversation with those in the military that have, as it were, authentic backgrounds and have waited patiently for many decades to put the right cards on the table. What I mean by the right cards, that will not panic people, but will give people an idea that we are here as part of a greater experiment, that we have lessons to learn, but those lessons come through freedom, come to association with both sides of the brain, the scientific, the analytical, the left, and the spiritual, the metaphysical, the multidimensional right. And I emphasize that we must be more right-orientated with the mind to understand spiritual pictures, spiritual areas of information, and also what we'll call the whole outpouring of the divine awakening. This, again, is not to overlook some critical decisions that we must make. Who is on first base? Who is holding back information? Who wants us to play additional wars ad nauseum? And who wants us to have victory over the warriors of the past paradigm? So all of this suggests a maturity of spirit, a maturity of conscience, an open-endedness of the heart. I believe this will come through a new type of leadership, a futurist, sociologist, environmentalist, those who want to take the high path as opposed to those who want to be involved in the trenches of the same old politics of saying this group is on this base and that group is on that base. We need to have those who see the big picture behind the big picture, the ecumenical blueprint of humanity at large being drawn together.
But right, Dr. Hurtak is right when he says the corporate interest, because it does seem, and I like David Grush talks about the legacy, information. I mean, it's been around for so long, and according to many researchers, of course, the we'll say UFO spaceships that the government is holding, the data was given to corporate interests to develop. And so it takes it away from the government having to make a statement about any of this stuff. And so that puts it back to, you can't push corporations to release.
But we need a new sociology. We need people to see the advantages of having this knowledge and the opportunity that we have energy alternatives that work. We've been involved in high-level research over the years with those in the field of hydrogen. We've been also working with those who are in what is called biorock, where you would take electrical systems and rejuvenate dying coral. So we have the mechanisms of rebirth, reorganization, a quickening of life, and a reconnection with divine source. And this is something we must build upon rather than separate one part of the brain from the other because of what I will call lower ends of mythology and theology that have been misunderstood. We have to grow up, and this is the whole work ahead of all of us. Exopolitics, yes, but also exosociology, exomedicine in other worlds, exotheology, according to the great Professor Stendhal at Harvard University, who many years ago said, we can accept the fact that there are other civilizations. And so it's really within the scriptures themselves that people would take time to read them in the original languages. So we're very optimistic in spite of the brutality, in spite of the wars and those who want wars, that the majority of people will respond favorably to information that's properly presented by the great scientists and the great spiritual thinkers working together.
And we do feel that President Carter actually did see a UFO. In fact, our friend Andre Puhark had a face-to-face meeting with him before he was president, and he detailed what he saw. And of course, he was actually a physicist, so he knew what he was looking at. He wasn't some guy who was, you know, from nowhere or just a lawyer. So also Ronald Reagan, actually, when he was governor, he also saw a UFO, and he flew, was flying from Northern California to Southern California, and he went to a fundraising party, and Shirley MacLaine was there, Lucille Ball was there. He talked about his event, what he saw, and of course Shirley's going, yeah, and Lucille Ball's going like, you're crazy, you know. But I mean, you know, basically they've shown themselves to government people, key people around the world. Mostly these were prior to even being president. So, you know, you wonder, do they know the future? I think they do.
And there's one other significant area. My colleague, Dr. Ted Peters, Protestant theologian at graduate school at UC Berkeley, set out a question here more than 20 years ago to Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish theologians. Do they accept the fact that there is a divine source of higher intelligence? Would this conflict with their theology? And the majority said no. They would understand that there's a higher end to the information curve that we're entering right now. So again, from the standpoint of a higher, more magnificent understanding of the philosophy of life, the theology of eternity, the experience of evolution, seen as spiritual maturity and evolution, not the Darwinistic evolution, the understanding of New Egyptology, and also the resources from Latin America, and particularly the Mayan civilization. We know that there is great and awesome civilizations that speak volumes of what we're about to understand. We're here much longer as a human race. Great civilizations came and went because of the imbalance of information, and that's the whole purpose of our conversation. We must balance the left and the right side of the brain. We must balance the heart with the objective reality that we face. We must become wayshowers of a higher path.
But I have to say, and I don't want to drag this on too much longer, but we are very important, I think, in the cosmic scheme of things. And there was an event in Brazil called Varginha. It was Roger Lear who went down there and talked to the physicians who had for a very short time these alien bodies that they were trying to save. And they were odd bodies. They stank. They were more like grayish green. They had red eyes. They had little protuberances on their heads, but they talked telepathically. And they were trying to tell the doctor how to help them and things like that. But one of the things that Roger reported was the fact that the alien said, it's very sad that you don't know who you are.
You humans do not know who you are.
So, and that now has been carried over to James Fox program on that while we were talking to him about it. So they know that we are a superior species. We have a lot more capabilities.
But we've gone to sleep. We've gone to deep sleep.
Well, we've been dumbed down.
And we do not understand the great gifts that await us when we begin to connect the dots and see the celestial spheres known by the ancients, and particularly in New Testament
one last question.
The light. Sorry, go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask one last question before we kind of start wrapping it up, and that is you spoke about the Book of Enoch. The historic Book of Enoch, but there's also the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, or also called the Slavonic Enoch, or Enoch 2, that talks about this order of Melchizedek. And that struck me as kind of pretty interesting, because it said that Enoch, the biblical Enoch, was dictated 350 books filled with knowledge by the Ancient of Days and by the higher angels, and that his job was to protect that knowledge and to one day to disseminate it for the survivors of the Great Flood. So what do you know about this Slavonic Book of Secrets of Enoch?
Well, I've translated from the Greek and the Slavonic and the Ethiopic. These are the first and second Enoch books, and the languages generally associated with them. That the second book of Enoch is much shorter, but as you said, uses certain terminology which I think is very relevant to this conversation, such as the Aramaic, most Ancient of Days, Most High God. These terms are very important, and we find that in our work worldwide, people respond favorably to the teaching of Enoch of the other worlds and the mystery of science connected with the higher worlds. And so if the Ethiopic church, the Coptic church, considered these books biblical in the sense that they were inspired. The Roman Church, the Protestant Church, simply said that these were mythological reconstitutions, projected history, and had no relevance. But we disagree. We feel that the Enochian teaching, of which the Keys of Enoch are reflective, represent a higher realm of teaching, a multidimensional cosmology, a cosmology of consciousness, that we are sons and daughters of God awakening to our plan to participate in the galactic family.
And both books of Enoch, the ancient ones, that is, talk about the cosmology of the heavens around us and the various types of, we'll say, God, small g, that we are being confronted with at all times. You mentioned Melchizedek, and I just want to say, in relationship to what we call ultra-terrestrial forms of intelligence, even the Bible said he was here, you know, and he met Abraham.
But he was fatherless and motherless, which means he was the eternal being who came and blessed Abraham. And that's the tradition of Western civilization. The three major religions of Abraham were this greater capacity to understand the message of Melchizedek, who blesses Abraham and also explains that his offspring into the future will inherit the stars. So I believe we're at that stage. And Michael, thank you for bringing this into this discussion. May the Most High God, El Elyon, or in the Aramaic, Atik Yomim, bless us, manifest great joy amongst all branches of humanity, and bring us and quicken us into the cosmic creation story as we see a new beginning, a new Genesis unfold before our eyes.
Well, thank you very much for being on this show. I think you represent a body of knowledge that has been suppressed and kept from the mainstream for many, many decades. And I know you've been involved, both of you, JJ and Desiree, since the 1970s, 73 in JJ's case, in putting out this information. So people, where do they go if they want to buy some of these books or learn more about what you're doing, future events and so forth?
Right. So our website is keysofenoch.org. If you want a science site, it's futurescience.org. But if you go to keysofenoch.org, you can actually go to Dr. Hurtak's commentaries in our shop for Book of Enoch and Enoch 2, or Second Enoch as well as our own book, the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch.
Some of our scientific papers are on the internet, those with SRI Scientist, and others have yet to be placed because they were written many years ago in very sensitive areas. But we work in more than 17 languages in more than 30 countries with the hope that we will see the dawning of the age of the divine or Holy Spirit in our hearts. So we are blessed, and we bless all of you out there as future cosmic citizens. Receive the light and receive the blessings of the heart and unity. Thank you, Michael.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.